When Liam bought the old cabin by the lake, the realtor called the water peaceful. It was deep, dark, and almost perfectly still, tucked between pine-covered hills with a small dock that creaked when you walked on it. The kind of place people posted online with captions about escaping the noise. The locals had a different name for it. They called it Bottomless Bay. They said no one had ever hit the true bottom. Sonar scans came back wrong. Anchors dropped straight down and never quite met resistance. And on windless days, when the surface of the lake turned to glass, some people swore they could see something impossible below the reflection of their own faces. A staircase, spiraling down into the black. Liam thought it was just a story. Until the drought came, and the lake shrank far enough to reveal the first few steps. Liam wasn't running away so much as stepping sideways. His marriage was over, his job had gone fully remote, and the city he'd lived in for a decade suddenly felt cramped and stale. When a listing for a cheap lakeside cabin 3 hours away popped up, he took it as a sign. The photos showed a weathered dock, a small boathouse, and a sprawling lake surrounded by dense, evergreen forest. The sky in every picture was reflected almost perfectly in the water, broken only by the faint ripple of wind. "It's quiet," the realtor told him during the tour, as if that were the property's main feature. No tourists, no party boats. Locals mostly fish on the other side. "Why's this place so cheap?" Liam asked. The realtor hesitated. "Older wiring, some foundation work needed." "And the lake?" "Just a lake," she said too quickly. He noticed a framed newspaper clipping on the wall near the kitchen. It was yellowed with age, the headline barely legible. "Teen presumed drowned in local lake. Search continues." There were pushpin holes above and below it, like other clippings had been removed. "Bad taste," the realtor said when she caught him looking. "The previous owner liked collecting old local stories. I'd take that down if I were you." Liam bought the cabin anyway. The price was too good, the silence too complete. For the first few weeks, life settled into a slow rhythm. Work during the day, walks through the pine woods, evenings on the dock, legs dangling over the water, watching the sky go from gold to black. The lake felt heavy, like a held breath, but he told himself that was just his imagination responding to its depth. Then the drought started. By midsummer, the region was on the news. Record-breaking heat, reservoirs low, lawns turning brown. The lake reacted slowly at first. The shoreline retreated a few inches, then a foot, then several. Small rocks that had always been underwater glittered in the sun. The end of the dock no longer hovered over a dark void. He could see submerged stones a few feet down. It wasn't alarming at first, just strange. Liam started marking the waterline on one of the dock posts with a pencil, noting the date next to each faint line. 2 inches, another 1.5 inches. The fish seemed to follow the deeper channels toward the center. The usual surface activity dropped off. Some mornings, the water looked like glass, unbroken, mirror smooth, reflecting the sky and tree line almost perfectly. On one of those mornings, he noticed something odd. Standing at the end of the dock with his coffee, he stared down at his own reflection. The pale oval of his face, the outline of his shoulders, the taller dark shapes of the trees behind him. Then, beneath that familiar surface image, he thought he saw something else. A faint curve, a suggestion of angles. It looked almost like a spiral shadow, vanishing into deeper darkness below his reflected feet. He blinked and shifted his angle. The shape disappeared. "Light trick," he muttered. But after that, he couldn't stop seeing it. Every perfectly still morning, the glassy surface seemed to show him the same thing. A blurry, spiraling shape directly beneath the end of the dock, like a staircase whose edges refused to resolve clearly. He considered asking someone about it. There weren't many someones to ask. The nearest neighbor, a man in his 60s named Frank, lived in a smaller cabin, a 10-minute walk along the shore. They'd exchanged a few basic conversations about generators, septic tanks, and winter preparations. One afternoon, under the pretense of borrowing a tool, Liam brought it up. "Does the lake get weird when it's this low?" he asked. Frank squinted at him. "Define weird." "Like shapes under the water. Things that aren't there when the level is normal." Frank's expression closed up like a door. "You seeing something?" "Probably not," Liam said quickly. "Just shadows." Frank wiped his hands on a rag, looking past Liam toward the lake. "You want my advice? Don't stare at it too long when it's flat like that. Folks get funny ideas." "What kind of ideas?" "There's more down there than mud and fish," Frank said. "Lake's deep. Been swallowing things longer than either of us have been alive. Boats, engines, a couple people. No one likes to talk about it. I saw an old article in my cabin, Liam said quietly, about a local kid drowning. There were more, Frank said, and walked away before Liam could ask anything else. The drought worsened. The lake kept dropping. One weekend, a group of game wardens came by in a small motorboat, checking on water levels and fish stock. Liam watched them from the dock as they zigzagged slowly across the surface, a portable sonar unit humming beside the driver's knee. Curiosity got the better of him. When they drew near his side of the shore, he raised a hand. "How bad is it?" "We've seen worse," one of them said, shading her eyes, "but not by much." "Ever find anything interesting down there?" he asked, nodding at the sonar. "Like old cars, trees, that sort of thing?" "Tree stumps, lots of junk," she said. "Lakes are messy." He hesitated. "Ever see anything that looks like a structure?" "You mean like a building?" "Or stairs?" The driver laughed once, short and humorless. "Stairs beneath the lake," he said. "That's a new one." The woman didn't laugh. "You from around here?" "Just moved in," Liam said. "Why?" She studied him for a moment, then killed the motor. The boat drifted, rocking gently. "There's a local story," she said. "Probably just that. Some sonar tech years back told folks he picked up something out in the middle. A spiral, like a tower turned upside down and buried under the water. People heard stairs and ran with it. Next thing you know, teenagers are out here diving, trying to find them." "Did they?" "One didn't come back," she said. "We pulled his body up near the eastern point. The others swore he'd been right beside them, heading down, following something they couldn't quite see. They said he kept going even when they turned back, like something was leading him." "That's..." Liam forced a laugh. "Comforting." The driver restarted the motor. "Water does weird things to your head," he said. "Noise, pressure, reflections. My advice? Don't go looking for anything down there that isn't already floating." They moved on, leaving a trail of ripples that distorted the lake's surface. When the water smoothed again, Liam stared down. His reflection stared back. Below it, the spiral shadow seemed clearer than ever. By late August, the dock no longer reached the water. It hovered over damp, exposed lakebed, cracked mud and slick stones that had not seen sunlight in years. Aquatic plants lay collapsed in pale tangles, their roots drying out in the heat. Liam extended the dock with a makeshift ramp, dragging wooden planks down to the new waterline. As he did, he noticed something emerging nearby. At first, it looked like a line of oddly smooth rocks embedded in the mud. But as the level dropped another foot over the next few days, the shape clarified. It wasn't a random scatter of stones. It was a curve, a wide, gently spiraling curve, its surface made of flat, pale slabs that cut through the lakebed in a neat, regular pattern. Each slab was roughly the same width, the same rise. Steps. The sight hit him with a jolt that made the air feel thinner. There, maybe 6 feet from the end of his ramp, half buried in wet earth and old algae, was what looked exactly like the top of a stone staircase disappearing into the lakebed, curving downward into the remaining water. No one had built anything like that on this shore. There were no ruins, no old foundations, no records of a submerged town. This was just supposed to be a deep, natural lake. Liam stood at the edge of the exposed mud, staring. Dragonflies flitted overhead. A faint, rotten smell rose from the drying weeds. He stepped off the ramp and tested the ground. It squelched under his boots but held. Carefully, he made his way toward the curve. Up close, the steps were even stranger. They weren't made of the same rough stone as the surrounding rocks. They were smoother, too regular, their edges worn but clearly carved. Each tread was wide enough for 2 people to stand side by side. Thin lines, almost like chisel marks, radiated from a central point somewhere deeper underwater. He crouched and touched the top step. It was cold. Not cool from shade or wetness. Cold like something that hadn't warmed properly despite being exposed to the summer air. When he looked down into the water, following the spiral's path, he saw only darkness. The staircase curved away and vanished beneath the surface after just a few visible steps, continuing into depths the drought hadn't revealed. A rational part of his brain ran through possibilities. Old, well-collapsed mine entrance, natural formation that just happened to look carved. Another part, the one that had grown up on ghost stories and lake legends, whispered something else. This was what the sonar had seen. This was what that boy had followed down. That night, Liam dreamed of standing at the end of the dock, watching the staircase descend into black water that went on forever. Something was waiting at the bottom. He couldn't see it. He could only hear it breathing, slow and steady, each exhale sending a faint ripple all the way to the surface. When he woke up, his sheets were damp with sweat. The lake was perfectly still. He tried to ignore it. For 3 days, he avoided the shore, telling himself he needed to focus on work. But the knowledge sat at the back of his mind like a stone in his shoe. Descending stairs, spiral shape, drowning teenager who kept going. The drought didn't care about his avoidance. The waterline dropped another 6 inches. More of the steps emerged, 8, then 10, then 12, each one curving a little further down into the sloping lakebed. On the 4th day, he gave in. He told himself he was only going to document it. Take photos, maybe measure a few steps. Nothing more. The mud was firmer now, baked on top. The staircase stood out starkly against it, pale and precise, like a piece of another place forced up through the earth. He counted 13 visible steps before the 14th disappeared into the murky water. He took photos from every angle, then pulled out his phone's flashlight and leaned over the edge, shining the beam into the water. The light cut maybe 6 feet down. He saw more pale edges curving away, swallowed grain by the greenish haze. "How far do you go?" he whispered. The lake didn't answer. He should have turned around. Instead, he stepped onto the first stair. The stone was slick, but stable. Cold shot up through the soles of his boots. Teeth clenched, he went down another step, then another, pausing each time to test his footing. By the 4th step, the lakebed sloped up slightly, giving him more clearance above the waterline. He could see further along the spiral, the steps turning steadily toward the deeper center of the lake. The air felt cooler here, as if something radiated up from below. He told himself he'd go no further than the last dry step. When he reached it, he hesitated. The next stair was half submerged, a thin film of dark water covering its tread. Beyond that, the curve disappeared completely into the lake. He turned his head back toward the shore. It looked further away than it should have. The cabin, the ramp, the dock, they all seemed slightly distorted, as if viewed through heat haze. "You're freaking yourself out," he muttered. He lifted his foot, hovering it over the first submerged step. The water lapping against the stone made no sound. For reasons he couldn't articulate, that silence terrified him more than any imagined monster. He put his foot down anyway. The water was shockingly cold. Far colder than any shallow lake, water had a right to be in late summer. It soaked through his boot instantly, numbing his toes. He grit his teeth and shifted his weight forward, testing whether the step would hold. It did. A faint vibration tickled up through his bones, like he was standing on some enormous engine turned low. His phone buzzed in his pocket and nearly sent him sprawling. He jerked back on instinct, slipping on the wet stone, hands flailing for balance. For a split second, his weight tilted toward the inner curve, toward the deeper water, toward the spiral's eye. Panic surged. He threw himself backward, scraping his palms on the rough edge of a higher step. He scrambled up, boots slapping, breath harsh in his throat, retreating along the spiral until his feet hit mud again. Only when he was safely on the shore did he dare look back. The steps sat motionless, pale and patient. His phone, still buzzing, showed a text from an unknown number. It was just coordinates. Lat long. When he plugged them into a map later, alone in the cabin with the blinds drawn, he felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. The coordinates marked the exact center of the lake, a point directly along the invisible line his spiral staircase curved toward. That night, the wind picked up. Waves lapped against the exposed mud, turning it back into muck. The sound should have been comforting, proof that the water still behaved like water. Instead, it barely registered for Liam. He lay awake in bed, every creak of the cabin amplified. When sleep finally came, it did so in pieces, broken by flashes of imagery, stairs spiraling down into black, too many steps to count, hands trailing along a stone wall he hadn't seen above the surface, something moving below him in the dark, keeping pace with his descent without ever breaking the surface. In one dream, he reached the bottom. There was no floor, not in the normal sense. The staircase simply ended at a wide circular platform suspended in black water that went even further down. In the center of that platform, perfectly still, something waited. He couldn't remember its shape when he woke up, only how it made him feel. Small, observed, and already known. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen around the cabin. Once, standing at the sink, he turned on the tap and got nothing but a thin stream of silt and cold, dark water that smelled like the lakebed. It cleared after a few seconds, regular water returning as if nothing had happened. Another time, he woke up to find damp footprints on the wooden floor leading from the front door toward the back of the house. They were not his. They were too long, too narrow, the toes slightly pointed. The wood around each print was wet, but there was no trail beyond the kitchen. The door had been locked from the inside. He told himself he was sleepwalking. He stopped believing that when he reviewed footage from a cheap motion-activated camera, he'd pointed at the shoreline. Most of the clips were boring. Waves, birds, shifting shadows. But one file, time-stamped just after 3 a.m., made his skin go numb. The lake was completely still. The sky above was dark. For a full minute, nothing moved. Then, very slowly, the surface directly above where the steps were flickered. Not like a splash or a ripple, more like something just beneath the surface had exhaled. The water bulged outward, then settled. After that, the camera recorded 30 seconds of static. When the image returned, the staircase was one step more exposed than it had been the day before. The drought had not advanced that much overnight. He knew because he'd marked the waterline carefully. Something else had changed the level, something below. Locals started talking about rain. The heat was breaking. Storms were forecast for the weekend. Liam felt an irrational urgency tighten in his chest. The idea of the lake refilling, of the stairs disappearing again beneath opaque water, was both a relief and a terror. He didn't want them gone. He didn't want them hidden. He didn't want to imagine something climbing them up instead of luring people down. The night before the storm, the air felt electric. Clouds piled on the horizon. The lake was lower than he'd ever seen it. Nearly 20 of the spiraling steps were exposed now, curving gracefully down into a pool of water that seemed far too deep for such a shrunken shoreline. He stood at the edge of the mud, flashlight in hand, heart beating too fast. "This is your last chance," he told himself, not sure whether he meant his last chance to see or to turn away. He didn't remember making the decision to go down again. One moment he was on the shore. The next he was on the 5th step, then the 8th, then the 10th, flashlight beam cutting through heavy, damp air. Each step he took downward made the world above feel further away. The cabin, the trees, the shore, all of it seemed like a memory already fading. By the time he reached the lowest exposed step, the water lapping at its edge was black and perfectly still, as if the wind above couldn't touch it. His flashlight beam vanished into it without reflection, swallowed whole. "How far do you go?" he whispered again. For the first time, something answered. It didn't speak in words. It answered with pressure, with knowing, with a feeling that rushed up from below and filled his chest like cold water, turning his next inhale into a shudder. Images flashed through his mind that were not his. A boy laughing as he dove from a boat, following what he thought were natural rock shelves downward. His laughter fading when he realized the steps kept going far beyond where his lungs could comfortably handle, yet he couldn't make himself turn back. The strange, eerie calm that came over him when he finally let go and kept walking downward through water that didn't feel like water anymore. Liam staggered, gripping the outer edge of the spiral. The stone under his hand felt almost pleased. The water at his feet didn't move. And yet, watching it, he had the overwhelming impression of something slowly ascending, step by step. "No," he said, voice raw. "Stay there." Thunder rolled somewhere far off. The first flicker of lightning lit the clouds. The storm was coming. Rain would fill the lake. If he left now, the staircase would be submerged again. Whatever had built it, whatever used it, would be buried in dark water for who knew how many more years. Maybe that was good. Maybe that was the point. He forced himself to turn. Each step upward felt heavier, like invisible hands were pressing gently on his shoulders, urging him to reconsider. By the time he reached the mud, the sky had gone from gray to an ugly, bruised purple. Wind whipped across the exposed lakebed, finally making the grasses bow. Behind him, the staircase waited, pale and patient. "I'm done," he said to it, to the lake, to himself. He wasn't sure it believed him. That night, rain hammered the roof so hard it kept him awake. Lightning flashed like someone flicking a faulty light switch in the sky. Thunder rattled the windows. He lay there, counting seconds between flashes, listening to the roar of water pouring back into the basin. In the brief silences between thunder, he heard something else, a steady dripping, not from the roof, from somewhere under the floorboards, as if water were seeping up, not down. By morning, the lake looked normal again. The shoreline had crept up, swallowing the exposed mud, the plants, the lower posts of the dock. The staircase was gone. He stood on the ramp he'd built and stared down. The surface was murky now, stirred by the storm, but in the wavering reflection of the sky, he thought he could still see a hint of curved shadow, spiraling into nothing. He sold the cabin in the fall, to a young couple who thought the lake looked peaceful. He didn't mention the steps. The realtor didn't either. The official paperwork called it Deep Natural Lake, popular for fishing. Months later, in his new apartment back in the city, Liam sometimes woke up in the night with wet, numb feet, as if he'd just climbed out of cold water. He'd go to the bathroom, turn on the light, and find faint smears of lakebed mud on the tile that disappeared if he blinked too long. Once, during an especially vivid nightmare, he shot awake certain he'd been sleepwalking, the taste of stagnant water clinging to his tongue. In the morning, he checked his phone. There was a new message from an unknown number. Just coordinates, slightly different this time. A point not at the center of the lake, but near the exact depth where the staircase had disappeared beneath the surface the day of the storm. He deleted it without opening the map. As the years pass, Bottomless Bay goes through its natural cycles. Wet years, dry years. There are always stories. A boat that drifts strangely near the middle. A swimmer who feels stone underfoot where no stones should be. A diver who swears he saw a pale curve disappearing into blackness below his fins. And sometimes, on the stillest days, when the water lies perfectly flat, reflecting the sky with unnerving clarity, you can stand on the dock and see your own face looking back. If you stare long enough, you might notice something else beneath your reflection. A faint spiral. Steps leading down. If you ever see them, turn away. Don't lean closer. Don't try to follow them with your eyes. And whatever you do, don't go into the water to see if they're really there. Because the stairs beneath the lake aren't just waiting at the bottom. They're counting how many times someone almost follows them. And sooner or later, they expect to be used again. And when you finally do step onto them, whether in this life or the next dream you can't wake from, they won't be leading you down into the lake. They'll be leading something else up.